Returning from work, I found my entire life dumped on the front lawn. My father, a respected pastor, stood on the porch and called me a parasite. My sister just laughed while her husband kicked my grandmother's vintage suitcase. I packed silently, warning them they would deeply regret this choice. 10 days later, my phone erupted with 98 frantic messages begging for mercy. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Maya. I am 33 years old. The late afternoon sun was beating down on the manicured grass of our family historic Victorian home when my cab pulled up to the curb. I stepped out in my modest beige work slacks and a simple blouse, completely unprepared for the sight waiting for me. Spread across the lawn like garbage waiting for the dump truck were all my worldly possessions. My clothes were scattered, my favorite books were tossed haphazardly, and sitting right in the center, completely scuffed from being dragged down the concrete steps, were the vintage leather suitcases that once belonged to my late grandmother Eleanor. I stood frozen for a fraction of a second. The front door swung open and my father stepped out onto the porch. Pastor Marcus always wore a tailored suit, projecting the image of a flawless community leader. Today his dark blue jacket gleamed, but his face was twisted in a scowl of absolute pure disgust. "You are 33 years old and still crawling around the back house like a parasite," his voice boomed across the yard, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "It is time for you to face the real world, Maya. I am not harboring a failure who dropped out of med school anymore." From the porch swing, a high-pitched laugh pierced the air. It was my younger sister, Vanessa, the golden child. She sat there in a designer maternity dress, sipping iced tea, looking absolutely delighted by my humiliation. Next to her stood her husband, Brad. He was a white finance bro who thought marrying a pastor's daughter gave him some kind of urban credibility. He walked down the porch steps, his expensive loafers crunching on the gravel, and casually kicked the box holding my college textbooks. "Come on, Maya," Brad sneered, crossing his arms. "In America, you have to earn your keep. Vanessa and I are having a baby. We need that back house to build my new streaming studio. You cannot just coast through life on your family charity. You need to learn how to make smart investments instead of pushing paper around at whatever little clerk job you do." They thought I was broke. They thought my boring administrative job barely paid minimum wage. They had no idea I was a senior forensic accountant for one of the top financial firms in the country, or that my entire salary for the past 5 years had been secretly paying the exorbitant property taxes on this very house. Because if I did not, the bank would have foreclosed on Pastor Marcus long ago. Grandmother Eleanor built this family legacy from the ground up during a time when Black women were rarely allowed to own property. Before she passed away, she made me promise to protect the estate. She knew my father cared more about appearances than actual financial stability. He drove luxury cars and wore expensive watches, while the church struggled to keep the heating on during winter services. And Vanessa was exactly like him. She had married Brad because he constantly bragged about his cryptocurrency portfolio and endless wealth. But as a forensic auditor, I knew the truth. Brad was drowning in hidden debt. His shiny new sports car parked in our driveway was leased, and his big investment firm was nothing more than a desperate scheme built on lies. They thought they were throwing out a useless burden today, but they were actually evicting their only financial shield. I looked at Vanessa, who was rubbing her belly and smiling. Then I looked at my father, who was pointing a stern finger toward the street. They expected me to cry. They wanted me to drop to my knees and beg for a week to find a cheap apartment. They craved the power of breaking me down just like they always did. Instead, I felt nothing but cold, sharp clarity. I did not shed a single tear. I walked calmly up the driveway past Brad and his arrogant smirk, and stopped right at the pile of my belongings. I bent down and picked up the only thing that truly mattered: my encrypted corporate laptop. It held the financial files that would soon tear their entire fake empire to the ground. I stood up, tall, looked my father directly in the eye, and spoke with a voice completely devoid of emotion. "I will go. But you need to remember this exact moment, Dad. because when that gate closes behind me, I am never paying another bill for this family again. Do not call me when the lights go out." Vanessa snorted and rolled her eyes. "Please," she mocked. "Like your little grocery money makes a difference. Brad makes more in a day than you make in a year. Get lost, Maya. Nobody here is going to miss your miserable attitude anyway." I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber Black. 10 minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. I climbed inside, ignoring the cheap boxes on the lawn. I left them standing on the porch, laughing at my apparent defeat, completely unaware that they had just handed me the keys to their absolute destruction. I watched them fade into the distance through the tinted glass window, feeling a profound sense of liberation. My new life was finally beginning right now. The heavy leather door of the SUV closed with a solid thud, shutting out the sound of my sister laughing on the porch. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, probably expecting to see a weeping woman who had just been thrown out of her house. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my titanium-encrypted laptop. The interface displayed my corporate dashboard showing the live status of global financial markets and my own heavily guarded portfolios. I was a senior forensic accountant, handling high-stakes corporate fraud for a top-tier international firm. For 5 long years, I had played the role of the struggling daughter, living in the back house wearing off-the-rack clothes and keeping my head down. It was a calculated performance. I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct line to my private wealth manager. He picked up on the second ring. "Good afternoon, Maya," he said. "I did not think we were scheduled to speak until Thursday." "Plans have changed, David," I replied. "I need you to pull up the master file on the Eleanor Estate Trust." "You mean the residency contingency clause?" he asked. "Maya, are you sure about this?" "They evicted me, David. My father threw my belongings onto the front lawn about 15 minutes ago. He stood there with Vanessa and Brad and told me I was a parasite who needed to earn my keep in the real world. They formally demanded I leave the property." There was a heavy pause on the line. He knew that for the past 5 years, I had been quietly transferring $50,000 every single year to cover the property taxes and maintenance for that historic Victorian house. Brad, the supposed financial genius, was too busy running his shady cryptocurrency schemes to ever check the county tax records. "If they evicted you," David said, his tone shifting from professional to dangerously sharp, "then the clause is fully activated. Your grandmother was a brilliant woman. She knew your father would eventually let his pride destroy the family assets." Grandmother Eleanor had drafted the trust with airtight precision. She left the house to my father on one strict condition. I had to be permitted to live on the premises for as long as I chose. She knew my father favored Vanessa. She knew he would eventually try to push me out to accommodate his golden child. So she created a fail-safe. The trust explicitly stated that if Pastor Marcus ever forcefully evicted me from the property, he would immediately forfeit all rights to the estate. The deed would automatically transfer into an irrevocable trust, controlled entirely by me. "Execute the clause, David," I instructed, staring out the window as the city skyline came into view. "I want an immediate asset freeze on the property. Shut it all down." "Maya, if I initiate a hard freeze right now, it will flag the deed across all financial institutions," he warned. "If your brother-in-law Brad is using that house as collateral for any of his shell companies, the banks will instantly freeze his connected accounts too. The margin calls will hit him before the end of the week." "That is exactly what I'm counting on," I replied. "Brad has been bleeding the church congregation dry with his fake investment pitches. He used my father to gain their trust. He thinks he is a wolf of Wall Street, but his entire portfolio is a house of cards built on illegal loans." "Lock the deed. Consider it done," David said. "The freeze will be active in the system within the hour. By tomorrow morning, any credit lines tied to that property address will be suspended. Do you need me to arrange temporary housing for you?" For 3 years, I had owned a $4 million penthouse in the financial district. I only stayed in the back house on weekends and holidays to maintain the illusion and keep my promise to my grandmother. My family was so self-absorbed they never noticed I was gone half the week. They assumed I was working overtime at some miserable data entry job. As the SUV glided through the bustling city streets, I felt a profound weight lift from my shoulders. The mask was finally off. I no longer had to pretend to be small to make their fragile egos feel big. My father had chosen to cast me out to make room for a son-in-law who was actively defrauding their community. Vanessa had chosen to mock the only person standing between her and total bankruptcy. I had spent my career tracking down hidden offshore accounts, unmasking corrupt executives, and dismantling complex embezzlement schemes. I knew exactly how greedy men tried to hide their money. Brad was an absolute amateur compared to the criminals I usually investigated. His fake investment firm was a textbook Ponzi scheme reliant entirely upon new cash. By freezing the house, I was cutting off his central lifeline. Without that collateral, his operation would suffocate within days. The Uber pulled up to the private underground entrance of my luxury building. The concierge greeted me by name and swiped my secure fob for the private elevator. As I rode up to the top floor, I looked at the reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman staring back was not a victim. She was the architect of their impending ruin. The financial freeze was just the first domino. When my father tried to use the church credit card to fund his lavish lifestyle, and when Brad tried to shuffle his illegal loans to cover his tracks, they would hit a solid brick wall. They thought they had disposed of the family trash today. They had no idea they had just handed me the match to burn their false empire to the ground. I stepped out of the elevator into my massive, sunlit living room, ready to watch the collapse begin. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. For the first time in years, I woke up without the sound of my father practicing his booming sermons, or Vanessa complaining about the internet connection. I brewed a cup of espresso in my designer kitchen and looked out over the sprawling city skyline. My $4 million sanctuary was completely silent and perfectly mine. I took my time getting dressed, putting on a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Brad made in an entire month. When I arrived at the glass skyscraper that housed my corporate office, the security guards nodded respectfully. I walked past rows of busy analysts who immediately parted ways for me. I entered my corner office and locked the heavy door behind me. I had a massive corporate fraud case sitting on my desk for a Fortune 500 company, but today I had a very personal side project. I sat down at my triple monitor setup and cracked my knuckles. It was finally time to look under the hood of Brad and his brilliant financial empire. I logged into our proprietary forensic database. It was a highly restricted system that traced offshore accounts, hidden shell companies, and encrypted digital transactions across the globe. I typed in the name of Brad and his supposed investment firm, Apex Vanguard Solutions. Within seconds, the screen lit up with glowing red flags. Brad always bragged at Sunday family dinners about his genius cryptocurrency portfolio and massive real estate acquisitions. He loudly called himself a self-made financial guru. But as I traced the digital paper trail, the truth was incredibly pathetic. Apex Vanguard Solutions was barely a registered corporate entity. It had zero legitimate assets, no payroll, and absolutely no active client portfolios. What it did have was a staggering amount of high-interest commercial debt. Brad had taken out massive loans from unregulated private lenders operating overseas. These were the kind of aggressive lenders who destroyed your entire life when you missed a single payment. But what caught my absolute attention was the collateral he used. To secure $3 million in high-risk funding, Brad needed a massive hard asset. He did not own his leased sports car or his luxury apartment. He had used the historic Victorian family home. I leaned closer to the glowing monitors, scanning the digitized loan documents. My heart beat a steady rhythm of cold and calculated anger. Brad had somehow convinced my father to sign over partial power of attorney under the false guise of a church estate expansion project. Pastor Marcus, in his infinite greed, had handed a white-collar criminal the keys to our family legacy. Brad then forged the property appraisal to illegally inflate its value and used the deed to secure his illicit loans. Since I had initiated the severe asset freeze yesterday, those foreign lenders were about to get automated electronic notices that their collateral was legally inaccessible. The automated banking systems would immediately trigger harsh margin calls, demanding Brad pay the entire $3 million balance in pure cash by the end of the week. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, and my father was completely tied to the rapidly sinking ship. I saved the damning documents to a secure encrypted flash drive. I had the concrete evidence needed to send Brad to federal prison for wire fraud and forgery. But I was not going to hand it over just yet. I wanted them to truly feel the walls closing in first. By Tuesday afternoon, the first cracks in their perfect reality began to show. While I reviewed quarterly tax reports for corporate clients, a minor disaster unfolded across town. I did not need to be there to know exactly what was happening. Vanessa had spent months planning an extravagant baby shower at the most exclusive country club. She invited over 200 wealthy church members and socialites. She ordered expensive orchids, custom crystal favors, and a 5-course meal. She expected my father to foot the bill. Pastor Marcus always used the church discretionary fund credit card for his family expenses, treating congregation donations like his own personal piggy bank. He walked up to the country club event coordinator with his usual arrogant swagger and confidently handed over the gold corporate card to pay the final $30,000 deposit. He expected a polite thank you and a respectful bow. Instead, the coordinator ran the card through the machine and the terminal beeped a harsh red error. Declined. Pastor Marcus confidently told them to run it again, claiming it was a bank error. It declined a second time, then a third time. The asset freeze I placed on the estate triggered an automatic security lock on all accounts linked to that home address. The bank flagged the church credit card as a risk because my father illegally tied it to the home equity line. The manager informed Pastor Marcus that without immediate payment, the baby shower would be canceled. Vanessa stood there humiliated in front of her wealthy friends, her perfect image shattered in an instant. My phone buzzed on my desk. I saw a text message from my father. It was written in his typical demanding tone. Maya, you forgot to deposit your rent money into the joint account this month. The bank put a hold on my cards because of your negligence. Transfer $2,000 immediately. You are embarrassing your sister at the country club. Fix this right now. He believed I was just a forgetful tenant who ruined his afternoon. He had no idea he was already completely bankrupt. I read the message twice. I let out a soft laugh. I did not reply. I did not explain the asset freeze or the massive fraud. I simply swiped left and deleted the message. I placed my phone face down and went back to work. The financial glitch was only the beginning. The financial glitch was only the beginning. By Wednesday morning, my phone was vibrating aggressively across my glass desk. I picked it up and saw a barrage of messages from Vanessa. She was furious. The high-end florist she hired for her baby shower had officially canceled her order. The declined credit card from the country club had sparked a chain reaction. Luxury vendors talk. When one massive payment bounces, the others quickly pull their services to avoid taking a severe financial loss. Vanessa needed someone to blame. Her first text was pure entitlement. Maya, you ruined my baby shower. Dad said the bank put a hold on the accounts because you failed to transfer your pathetic rent money. The florist just canceled my custom orchid arrangements. You are so incredibly selfish. You always ruin everything. I took a slow sip of my coffee and typed back a calm response. I do not pay rent anymore, Vanessa. You and Brad made it very clear that I was a parasite who needed to leave. You kicked me out, remember? You cannot evict someone and then demand they pay your bills. Her reply came instantly. You are just jealous, Maya. You have always been jealous of me. You are a single woman working a dead-end clerk job, and I am married to a highly successful investor. Brad provides for me in ways you could never understand. Stop being bitter and send Dad the money right now so he can fix the bank error. I smiled at the glowing screen. She was walking right into the trap. I pushed her further to see what she would reveal. Brad is so successful he needs my rent money to pay for your flowers. That makes absolutely no sense, Vanessa. If his investments generate millions, why use Dad to fund your party? Why does Brad not just pay for it himself? The typing bubble on my screen pulsed for a long time. I knew I had hit a nerve. When her response finally came, it was defensive and reckless. You know absolutely nothing about high-level finance, Maya. Brad has all his capital tied up in a massive commercial real estate acquisition. He is leveraging assets to maximize our returns. He needed a temporary liquidity bridge, so he used the house to secure a short-term loan. Dad agreed to it. I narrowed my eyes and typed back swiftly. Dad agreed to put the historic family home up as collateral for Brad. I find that very hard to believe. Dad loves that house more than anything. He would never risk the deed on a volatile crypto loan. Vanessa was too angry to realize she was confessing to a federal crime. She just wanted to win the argument. She wanted to prove how smart her husband was. Her next text sealed their fate. Dad did not want to do it at first, but Brad handled the paperwork himself. Brad signed the authorization forms on behalf of Dad to expedite the underwriting process. It is called Power of Attorney Maya. Brad took care of the signature because Dad was too busy with church business. It is perfectly legal when you are family. My heart did a triumphant leap. There it was in black and white. Vanessa had just confirmed in writing that Brad forged my father's signature on the loan documents. She actually thought calling it power of attorney made the forgery legal. I took an immediate screenshot of the entire conversation. I downloaded the high-resolution images and transferred them directly to my secure encrypted server. This text thread was the final nail in the coffin. It proved criminal intent and willful fraud. I sent one last message to my sister. Forgery is a felony, Vanessa. Tell your successful investor husband to check his email. I put my phone on silent and turned my attention back to my dual monitors. The real-time financial tracking software on my left screen was lighting up with critical alerts. The massive margin calls had officially hit Brad and his fake investment firm. Because the collateral house was frozen by my trust directive, the shady overseas lenders were automatically executing their aggressive penalty clauses. Brad was experiencing a total catastrophic financial collapse right before my eyes. I watched as his primary shell company accounts were drained of their minimal operating cash. The lenders were sweeping his connected domestic bank accounts to recover their funds. His cryptocurrency wallets, which held only a fraction of what he bragged about, were forcibly liquidated at a major loss. The automated systems were absolutely merciless. Brad was losing everything in a matter of hours. I clicked on a detailed ledger showing his credit utilization. His personal credit cards were maxing out as the lenders triggered secondary collection protocols. The luxury leased sports car he loved to show off was suddenly flagged for repossession. His expensive lifestyle was evaporating into thin air. He had played a dangerous game with ruthless people, and now the massive bill was finally due. My right monitor displayed the county property records. The historic Victorian house was safely locked behind the impenetrable legal wall of grandmother Eleanor and her trust. No matter how hard the creditors tried, they could not touch the deed. Brad had offered them a ghost asset. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and watched the red numbers multiply on the screen. Brad was pacing his luxury apartment, sweating as bank apps locked him out. He would have to explain to Vanessa why her accounts were frozen. He would have to look my father in the eye and admit the money was gone. The golden child was about to learn her perfect marriage was a criminal illusion built on stolen money. They threw my life onto the lawn without a second thought. Now they were drowning in a financial hurricane, and they still did not realize I was controlling the weather from my quiet corner office. By Thursday morning, the financial hurricane I unleashed was silently tearing through Brad and Vanessa, perfectly curated lives. I sat at my desk watching the digital alerts multiply when my private cell phone rang. It was not my father demanding money or my sister throwing a tantrum. The caller ID displayed a number I had not seen in years. It was Deacon Hayes. He was the oldest and most respected elder on the church board. He was also the man who had delivered the eulogy at grandmother Eleanor's funeral. I picked up the phone immediately. "Hello, Deacon," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Maya." "I am so sorry to bother you at work," he whispered. His voice sounded frail and deeply anxious. "I know you and your father had a terrible falling out this weekend. He told the entire congregation that you moved away to find yourself, but I had to call you. Something is very wrong at the church. Moved away to find myself. That was a creative way to describe throwing your daughter's belongings onto the front lawn." But I pushed my anger aside. "What is going on, Deacon? It is about your brother-in-law, Brad," he explained. His voice trembled slightly. "For the past 2 months, Pastor Marcus has been holding private seminars after Sunday service. He has been actively encouraging the senior congregation members to invest their retirement savings into a new cryptocurrency startup managed by Brad. Your father promised us it was a divine financial blessing. He said Brad was guaranteeing a 30% return within the first quarter." My blood ran completely cold. I gripped the edge of my glass desk. A 30% guaranteed return was the textbook definition of a Ponzi scheme. Brad was not just taking out illegal commercial loans using my family home as collateral. He was actively draining the life savings of elderly people who trusted my father. "How many people invested, Deacon?" I asked, my tone dropping to a sharp professional register. "Almost 30 families," he replied. "The widowers, the retired teachers, the groundskeepers." Pastor Marcus even convinced the board to allocate $200,000 from the church building fund into Brad firm. But yesterday afternoon, the quarterly dividend checks bounced. When I tried to call Brad, his phone went straight to voicemail. When I asked your father about it, he got incredibly defensive and told me I lacked faith. "Maya, you work in finance. Please tell me our money is safe." The horrifying truth hit me like a physical blow. I had spent the last few days assuming my father was just a prideful fool who got tricked by a smooth-talking con artist. I thought he was merely a victim of his own vanity. But this changed everything. Pastor Marcus was not a victim. He was a complicit pawn. He was using his sacred position of authority to prey on his own vulnerable flock, all to fund Vanessa lavish baby showers and Brad fake empire. He was selling out the very people he swore to protect. "Listen to me very carefully, Deacon," I said, leaning forward in my ergonomic chair. "You need to go to your bank right now. Do not wait for tomorrow. Do not wait for after lunch. Go immediately and initiate a fraud recall on every single wire transfer you sent to Brad. Tell the bank manager you suspect wire fraud and elder financial abuse." "Elder abuse." The deacon gasped. "Maya, are you saying the money is gone?" "I am saying Brad is running a massive scam," I told him bluntly, "and the entire operation is collapsing as we speak. You need to quietly warn the other families to do the same. But Deacon, you cannot tell my father. If Pastor Marcus finds out you are pulling the funds, he will tip off Brad, and Brad will move whatever cash is left into an untraceable offshore account. Can you keep this quiet until tomorrow morning?" "Yes, Maya," he said, his voice hardening with sudden resolve. "I will spread the word to the others discreetly. We trusted him. We trusted your family." "I know you did," I replied softly. "I am going to fix this problem today. Just get to the bank." I hung up the phone and stared at my glowing monitors. The stakes had just astronomically escalated. This was no longer just a family dispute over a historic house. This was a massive federal crime affecting dozens of innocent lives. The foreign lenders who held the fraudulent mortgage on the house were already squeezing Brad for their $3 million margin call. If Brad panicked, he would try to drain the church retirement funds to pay off the dangerous offshore loan sharks. I could not let that happen under any circumstances. I had to race against the clock. I opened a new encrypted secure channel on my workstation and began compiling the official fraud dossier. I needed a bulletproof package to hand over to the federal authorities before Brad could flee the country. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I downloaded the forged loan authorizations, the falsified property appraisals, and the arrogant text messages from Vanessa admitting to the forgery. I cross-referenced Brad's shell companies with the church bank routing numbers proving the direct pipeline of stolen congregation funds. Every second counted. The dual monitors reflected in my eyes as I built the financial trap. I cataloged every bounced check, every rejected credit card, and every fake cryptocurrency wallet Brad had created. The sheer audacity of their greed was sickening. My father had traded his spiritual integrity for country club memberships and designer clothes. He had looked elderly widows in the eye and promised them a blessing while handing their life savings to a ruthless criminal. I printed the dossier. The stack contained enough evidence to put Brad away for decades. Handing this to local police was not enough. I picked up my phone to call the FBI. But before my finger could even press the first digit, the screen lit up with an incoming call. It was an unrecognized number. Usually I send unknown callers straight to voicemail, but my intuition told me exactly who was on the other end. I pressed the green accept button and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say a single word. I simply waited in the absolute silence of my corner office. Heavy, frantic breathing echoed through the small speaker, followed by the unmistakable voice of my brother-in-law. He was calling from an unregistered burner phone, trying to cover his tracks. "Maya," he sneered, trying to sound intimidating. "I know it is you. You think you are so incredibly smart sitting in your little cubicle playing amateur detective? You need to back off right now before I destroy you." He launched into a ridiculous tirade filled with empty corporate buzzwords he probably learned from watching motivational videos on the internet. He demanded that I stop aggressively poking around his limited liability companies. He claimed I completely lacked the foundational financial literacy required to understand his complex matrix of decentralized asset management and blockchain integration. He spoke to me as if I was a foolish child who had accidentally stumbled into a boardroom. "You are messing with high-net-worth individuals, Maya," he threatened, his voice dripping with unearned superiority. "My legal team is already drafting a massive defamation lawsuit against you. I know you have been spreading malicious rumors to Deacon Hayes and the church board, trying to ruin my reputation. You are nothing but a bitter spinster. You are desperately trying to sabotage Vanessa because you have always been deeply jealous of her affluent lifestyle and my explosive financial success." I let him rant. I listened to his pathetic attempts to reassert control over a situation he had already entirely lost. He told me he was going to sue me for tortious interference. He promised to bury me under so much legal paperwork that I would be paying his attorney fees for the rest of my miserable life. When he finally ran out of breath, he demanded an immediate apology. "Are you quite finished, Brad?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and entirely devoid of emotion. I heard him shift uncomfortably on the other end of the line, clearly expecting me to be crying or apologizing. "Because if your imaginary legal team is as competent as your accounting strategy, you are in serious federal trouble." I clicked open the encrypted dossier on my desktop monitor. "Let us talk about your high net worth portfolio," I said. "Your primary business, Apex Vanguard Solutions, is registered as an entity in Delaware, but it has not filed a legitimate annual tax report in 2 consecutive years. That is a direct violation of Federal Tax Code, Section 6012. Your secondary shell company, which you so cleverly named after your golden retriever, has absolutely zero liquid assets. It exists solely to funnel stolen money from my father congregation into an unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchange that was officially flagged by the Securities and Exchange Commission last month for international money laundering." "Shut up," Brad stammered, his confident facade instantly cracking. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are hacking into private corporate servers. I will have you arrested for cybercrimes." I ignored his empty threat and raised my voice slightly, cutting through his panic. "I am not even close to being finished, Brad. You committed wire fraud under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343, when you electronically transferred $200,000 from the church building fund directly into your personal digital gambling accounts. You took money meant for the community and lost it on high-stakes digital poker. And let us not forget the absolute masterpiece of your brief criminal career, You committed aggravated identity theft and severe bank fraud under Title 18, Section 1344, by deliberately forging my father's signature to collateralize a historic property you do not even own. The silence on the line was deafening. I could hear his rapid, shallow breathing. The arrogant finance bro who had kicked my books across the lawn just a few days ago was suddenly realizing he was outmatched. "You are just a clerk," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You cannot prove any of this." "I am a senior forensic accountant for a firm that handles federal audits for Fortune 500 companies, Brad." I corrected him sharply. "I track missing billions across global markets for a living. You left a digital trail so incredibly wide and sloppy that a first-year accounting student could follow it blindfolded. I have the forged loan authorizations, the falsified property appraisals, and the very text messages from your own wife admitting that you faked the signature." He let out a strange, choking sound. "Maya, please." He started begging, his tone shifting from aggressive to pathetic. "We can work this out. We are family." I leaned forward in my ergonomic leather chair, my eyes locked on the red alerts flashing across my financial tracking software. "We are not family, Brad. And there is one last detail you need to know. I am the one who authorized the hard asset freeze on the Victorian house. That property belongs to a trust that I exclusively control, which means those dangerous foreign lenders you borrowed money from just realized their collateral is completely void and legally untouchable." I waited a beat, letting the terrifying reality wash over him. "So my only question for you, Brad," I asked, my tone dropping to a deadly whisper, "is how exactly do you plan to cover that $3 million margin call due this Friday? Because the automated banking systems are sweeping your accounts right this very second, and those offshore lenders are not going to accept an apology." Brad panicked. He let out a terrified gasp that sounded like a drowning man grasping for air. Before he could form another coherent sentence, the line went completely dead. He hung up. The power dynamic was entirely flipped. I placed my phone face down on the glass desk. He was officially on the run, and his inevitable collapse was moving faster than even I had anticipated. The morning after my conversation with Brad brought a profound shift. It was Friday, the 7th day since my father threw my belongings onto the front lawn. I was reviewing a quarterly audit when my phone buzzed with an automated alert from the county clerk office. A formal notice of foreclosure and an official fraud investigation had just been served at the family estate. I leaned back, visualizing the scene unfolding at the historic Victorian house. Pastor Marcus usually spent his Friday mornings sitting on the front porch drinking coffee. Today, his peaceful routine was violently interrupted by a process server handing him a thick legal packet. It did not take long for my phone to ring. I looked at the screen and saw my father contact picture. He was wearing his custom-tailored suit. I answered the call and pressed the phone to my ear, but remained completely silent. "Maya, what did you do?" he bellowed. His voice was trembling with absolute rage and deep confusion. "I just had a man hand me a notice of foreclosure. The document says the property is under a severe asset freeze and is the subject of an active federal fraud investigation. You work as a clerk at one of these financial firms. Did you file a false report because you are angry about the back house?" I closed my eyes. He still refused to see reality. Even with a federal fraud notice sitting in his lap, he honestly believed I was just a petty clerk who somehow manipulated a massive bank out of pure spite. He truly thought Brad was a genius, and I was the bitter outcast ruining their perfect lives. "I did not file a false report, Dad," I replied, my voice steady. "The bank placed a freeze on the property because Brad used the deed to secure $3 million in illegal commercial loans. He forged your signature on the authorization documents. Your son-in-law is running a massive Ponzi scheme, and the foreign lenders are demanding their money." "That is an absolute lie," he shouted, his voice echoing sharply. "Brad is a brilliant investor. He is doubling the retirement funds of my entire congregation. You are spreading toxic lies because you are jealous of your sister. Ever since you left this house, your negative attitude has brought nothing but bad vibes and spiritual warfare to this family. You cursed us the moment you walked out that gate. You threw my belongings onto the front lawn, Dad, I reminded him. You stood on the porch and called me a parasite. You told me to face the real world. Do not use that disrespectful tone with me, he snapped. I am your father and the pastor of our community. I demand that you get over here right now and fix this clerical error. Call your supervisors and clear this up. Brad is stressed, and Vanessa is extremely upset. You are going to come back to this house and fix the mess you created. The sheer audacity of his demand was staggering. He wanted the daughter he discarded to miraculously fix a federal crime to save the man who committed it. For 33 years, I folded myself into small pieces to accommodate his massive ego. I paid his property taxes, smiled through his insults, and protected the legacy of grandmother Eleanor. But that version of Maya died the moment he kicked her boxes down the concrete steps. No, I said simply. Excuse me, he sputtered clearly, shocked by the single syllable. I am not coming over, I clarified, my tone dropping to a freezing temperature. I am not fixing your clerical error, and I am certainly not saving Brad from federal prison. You made your choice, Dad. You chose a criminal over your own daughter. You wanted me out of your house, and now I am out. Do not call me again. Before he could scream another insult, I pressed the end button. I blocked his number immediately. The hard boundary was officially set. I turned my attention back to work. Across town, my father was staring at his phone in disbelief. Pastor Marcus was not a man who handled rejection well. His entire identity was built on absolute authority and unwavering obedience. The fact that I had just hung up on him was an unforgivable offense. He grabbed his keys, stormed out of the house, and got into his luxury sedan. He was driving to the address I gave the family 3 years ago. When I bought my penthouse, I knew my family would never accept my success. They would demand money and destroy my peace. So I rented a cheap studio apartment in a rundown neighborhood across the city to use as my official mailing address and fake residence. I only stayed at the family back house on weekends to keep up appearances and protect the property. My father pulled into the cracked parking lot of the dilapidated apartment complex. He marched up the rusted metal stairs to Unit 4, ready to kick the door down and drag me back to the estate. He pounded his fist against the peeling paint, demanding that I open up immediately. Instead of me, a tired-looking building manager opened the door holding a wrench. My father demanded to see Maya. The manager gave him a confused look. Nobody named Maya lives here, the manager said, wiping grease from his hands. A guy named Hector has lived here for 3 years. You just have the wrong address. My father stood frozen on the rusted walkway. He looked at the cheap apartment, then down at his luxury shoes. The crushing realization hit him like a physical blow. He did not know where I lived. He did not know what I really did for a living. For the first time in his arrogant life, Pastor Marcus realized he knew absolutely nothing about his daughter. And he was alone, in a massive financial disaster. Saturday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky. I woke up early and walked straight into my home office. I had exactly 48 hours before Monday morning, when the federal authorities would officially open their offices. The dossier was almost complete, but I needed absolute unbroken concentration to finalize the cross-referenced financial logs for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission. I picked up my personal cell phone. I navigated to the settings menu and completely powered it down. I placed it inside my desk drawer and slid it shut. For the next 12 hours, I existed only in a world of digital ledgers, routing numbers, and undeniable criminal evidence. I mapped out every single dollar Brad had stolen from the church congregation and traced its exact path to his unregulated offshore accounts. By 8 o'clock that evening, my eyes burned from staring at the dual monitors, but the trap was perfectly set. The official federal whistleblower packet was encrypted, sealed, and ready for delivery. I leaned back, stretched my arms, and finally opened the desk drawer. I held the power button on my phone. The screen lit up with the glowing manufacturer logo. Then the floodgate violently broke open. The phone vibrated endlessly in my hand. notifications aggressively stacked on top of each other, buzzing like an angry hornet nest. 98 unread text messages and 40 missed calls. The timeline of the texts documented a spectacular psychological collapse occurring over a single day. I scrolled all the way up to the first message sent right after my father discovered my fake apartment address. The initial wave was pure unfiltered arrogance. Message number 1 from Vanessa arrived at 10 in the morning. Maya, you are acting like a total psychopath. Dad told me you gave him a fake address. Stop playing these stupid games and call the bank to unlock our accounts immediately. Message number 12 from my father read, I am your pastor and your father. You will obey me. I am giving you 1 hour to come to the house and sign whatever release forms the bank needs. If you do not show up, I am calling the police and reporting you for financial sabotage. Message number 24 was from Vanessa again. Her entitlement was practically dripping off the screen. Fix this now, you freak. The country club is threatening to sue me for breach of contract over the baby shower. My friends are asking questions. Brad is too busy handling his massive investments to deal with your pathetic temper tantrum. Send the money right now or you are permanently dead to me. I took a sip of water and kept reading. They were still clinging to their false reality, but by early afternoon the tone in the messages shifted dramatically. The bank had sent an emergency courier to the house with the official foreclosure and fraud documentation. The illusion of Brad being a financial genius was finally crumbling. Message number 35 from my father was laced with sudden confusion. Maya, I am looking at a legal document that says Grandmother Eleanor placed the house in an irrevocable trust. It says the deed transferred completely to you the day you left the premises. What trust fund? What does this mean? Call me. Message number 48 was a frantic text from Vanessa. Maya, pick up the phone right now. Brad is locking himself in the guest bathroom and will not come out. I just tried to log into our joint checking account to buy groceries, and the balance is negative $10,000. What did you do to my husband? Message number 60 from my father showed his absolute desperation as his world fractured. Maya, the bank manager, just told me that Brad forged my signature. He said Brad took out a $3 million commercial loan. Please tell me this is a huge mistake. The church retirement funds are missing. Deacon Hayes is refusing to take my calls, and the church board just scheduled an emergency meeting for Sunday morning. Maya, I do not understand what is happening to my church. Please call me back right now. The self-righteous pastor was completely gone, replaced by a terrified old man facing total ruin. The final batch of messages was a masterclass in sheer, unadulterated terror. The arrogant facade was entirely gone, replaced by the primal fear of a cornered criminal. Message number 75 was a direct text from Brad. It was completely stripped of his usual finance bro vocabulary. Maya, I know you are reading this. Please, you have to lift the asset freeze. The foreign lenders are executing their default protocols. I am ruined. Message number 82 from Brad read, Maya, they froze my offshore accounts. I cannot access the cryptocurrency wallets. The lenders are threatening to send collectors to the house. Please, you have to give them the deed. I will go to federal prison. Message number 90 from Vanessa was just a string of broken sentences begging for mercy. She finally realized she was married to a massive fraud. Maya, he lied to me. Brad lost all the money. The church money is gone. We have absolutely nothing. Please help us. And then I read the final message. Message number 98 sent by Brad just 10 minutes before I turned my phone back on. Maya, please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. The loan sharks just called my mother at her nursing home. They know where my family lives. They said they are coming to collect the debt in person. Call me back. I stared at the glowing screen. 98 messages of pure poetic justice. I plugged my phone into the charger and went to sleep perfectly. I woke up on Monday morning feeling more refreshed than I had in years. I showered and dressed in my sharpest black suit. Today was not about family drama, it was about federal law. I arrived at my corporate headquarters early. My security clearance granted me access to the executive boardroom on the top floor. Sitting around the massive mahogany table were 5 federal agents. 2 were from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and 3 were from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They wore stern expressions and dark suits expecting a routine whistleblower meeting. They had absolutely no idea what I was about to hand them. I took my seat at the head of the table and placed the thick printed dossier right in the center. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said. "I am Maya, the senior forensic accountant for this firm. The file in front of you contains irrefutable evidence of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, international money laundering, and the operation of an illegal Ponzi scheme." The lead FBI agent, a tall man named Harris, opened the file. His eyes scanned the first page, and then the second. The SEC director, sitting next to him, leaned in to look at the digital routing logs I had printed out. Their professional skepticism quickly evaporated, replaced by absolute astonishment. Usually when whistleblowers come to us, they bring fragmented suspicions or messy, incomplete records, Agent Harris said, looking up at me in disbelief. "You have completely mapped out the entire criminal enterprise. You have the forged authorization signatures, the falsified property appraisals, and the exact offshore cryptocurrency wallets." The SEC director shook his head in amazement. "You even traced the exact IP addresses he used to initiate the fraudulent transfers." "This is not just a tip, Maya. This is a fully prosecuted case wrapped in a bow. It would take my team 6 months to build a financial matrix this detailed." "I did it in 48 hours, I replied flatly. "The perpetrator is my brother-in-law, Brad. He used my family historic home as illegal collateral by forging my father's signature. Then he drained the retirement accounts of my father's church congregation to cover his massive trading losses. He is currently facing a $3 million margin call from unregulated foreign lenders. As of Friday, the bank initiated a hard asset freeze on the property because the house is legally protected by my grandmother trust. Brad is cornered. He has 0 liquid cash, and his offshore accounts are locked." Agent Harris closed the folder and folded his hands. "If he owes $3 million to unregulated foreign lenders, he is a massive flight risk. He will try to run before the week is over. We need to secure an arrest warrant immediately." "That is exactly why I called you," I said. "He is desperate and he is terrified. He left me 98 messages begging for a lifeline. I am going to offer him a fake one. I want to coordinate a sting operation right here in this building. I will tell him to come to my office tomorrow to sign the release papers for the house. When he arrives, he will be fully expecting a desperate family negotiation. Instead, he will be walking straight into federal custody." The agents exchanged impressed looks. The FBI and SEC rarely worked with civilians who were this ruthlessly efficient. Agent Harris nodded his agreement. "We will have armed agents stationed in the lobby and right outside your boardroom. Once he is inside the room and admits to the fraud, we will move in and make the arrest. We will also need to question your father, Pastor Marcus, regarding his involvement in the misappropriation of church funds." "Pastor Marcus might not be a pastor for much longer," I said, opening my encrypted laptop. As we were finalizing the tactical details of the sting operation, a high-priority email notification flashed across my screen. It was a secure message from the senior deacon of the church. I clicked open the email and read the contents. The pacing of their downfall was accelerating rapidly. The church board had held their emergency closed-door meeting on Sunday after my father failed to explain the missing retirement funds. The evidence I had quietly provided to the deacon was insurmountable. The board had officially voted unanimously to strip my father of his pastoral title. The email stated that the church locks were already changed. My father was legally barred from stepping onto the church grounds, and the congregation was preparing to file a massive civil class action lawsuit against him. My father's entire identity was wrapped up in his prestigious title. He demanded respect and obedience because he wore the cloth. He had thrown me away like garbage because he thought I was beneath him. Now he was a disgraced civilian locked out of his own sanctuary, facing catastrophic financial ruin and massive public humiliation. I looked up at the federal agents. The sting operation is set for tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I confirmed. I will send the text message to Brad right now. I picked up my phone, which was still completely silent since I had turned off the notifications. I typed a single cold message to the group chat that included Brad, Vanessa, and my father. Meet me at my corporate office downtown tomorrow at 2 o'clock sharp. Bring Brad or the police will be waiting at your front door. I hit send and placed the phone back on the desk. The trap was perfectly armed. The walls were rapidly closing in on the people who thought they could destroy me. They were completely stripped of their false power, their stolen money, and their fake prestigious titles. Tomorrow they would walk into this high-rise building, expecting to bully the family outcast into saving their miserable lives. They had no idea they were walking straight into a federal prison cell. Tuesday morning arrived with a chilling stillness. It was the 10th day since I was thrown out of my own family. I woke up in my quiet penthouse and walked into the kitchen. I had silenced my phone completely after sending the group text the previous afternoon. When I picked the device up from the marble counter and restored the cellular connection, a new notification immediately pushed through. It was a frantic voice note from Vanessa. I tapped the screen and listened as her hysterical crying filled the empty room. "Maya, please, you have to answer me," she sobbed, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "Brad is tearing the apartment apart. He is trying to pack a suitcase. He says we have to leave the country right now, but all our bank accounts are completely locked. The cards are declining everywhere. He is terrified, Maya. He says dangerous people are coming for him. Dad is on his way over here, and he will not stop screaming about the church locking him out. Please tell me you are going to help us. Please tell me you can fix this." I listened to the entire recording without blinking. The golden child was finally experiencing the real world. She had spent her entire life shielded by my father and funded by stolen money. Now the shield was gone. I typed a single text message in response to her voice note to ensure they understood the gravity of the situation. "Meet me at the lawyer office downtown at 2 o'clock sharp. Bring Brad or the police will handle this. Do not be late." I hit send and watched the message mark as delivered. There was no reply. They had no choice but to obey. I spent the rest of the morning preparing the final stage. I dressed in a tailored navy blue suit that projected absolute authority. When I arrived at the towering glass skyscraper that housed my firm, the atmosphere was already charged with electric anticipation. I walked through the polished marble lobby and took the private elevator to the executive floor. Agent Harris and his federal team were already there coordinating with our corporate security staff. The massive mahogany boardroom had been perfectly staged for the sting operation. High-definition recording devices were discreetly activated in the ceiling corners, capturing every angle of the room. Harris approached me holding a sleek digital tablet. "We have a perimeter established," he informed me, his voice low and professional. Two plainclothes agents are stationed in the main lobby, pretending to read newspapers. Another team is waiting in the maintenance hallway, right behind this boardroom. We have locked down the parking garage and the freight elevators. There is absolutely no way Brad is leaving this building once he steps onto this floor. I nodded, looking around the expansive room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the entire city. It was the perfect setting for a financial execution. "Are we sure he will not try to run before he gets here?" I asked. Harris smiled a tight, confident smile. "We have had unmarked vehicles tracking his movements since yesterday evening. He tried to buy a plane ticket to the Cayman Islands at 4 in the morning, but his passport was flagged, and his frozen accounts blocked the transaction. He is trapped like a rat in a maze. He has nowhere else to go but here. He thinks you are his last remaining lifeline." The hours ticked by with agonizing precision. I sat at the head of the long wooden table reviewing the printed dossier one last time. At exactly 1:45 in the afternoon, the phone on the conference table buzzed. It was the front desk receptionist. "Miss Maya," she said, her voice perfectly polite. "You have 3 guests arriving in the main lobby. A Mr. Marcus, a Miss Vanessa, and a Mr. Brad. They are demanding to be brought up immediately. Send them up to the executive floor," I instructed. Have security escort them directly to the boardroom. I hung up the phone and looked over at Agent Harris. He gave me a sharp nod and quietly slipped out of the room through the side door, disappearing into the maintenance hallway with his team. I was left completely alone in the massive space. I turned my chair slightly to face the heavy frosted glass doors. My heart was beating in a slow, steady rhythm. For my entire life, these three people had made me feel incredibly small. They had criticized my clothes, mocked my ambitions, and treated me like a disposable servant. They truly believed their aggressive arrogance made them untouchable. I watched the shadows of three figures approach through the frosted glass. I could hear my father's loud, demanding voice echoing in the quiet corporate hallway. He was probably trying to intimidate the security guards. The heavy doors finally swung open and they stepped into the room. The visual transformation was absolutely staggering. My father was not wearing his pristine tailored suit today. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt, and his face was pale and deeply sunken. He looked like a defeated, broken old man. Vanessa walked in right behind him, clutching her expensive designer handbag like a protective shield. Her eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying. And then there was Brad. The arrogant finance bro who had violently kicked my books across the front lawn was now sweating profusely. His expensive luxury loafers scuffed awkwardly against the polished marble floor. He looked around the massive upscale corporate boardroom with wide, terrified eyes, instantly realizing he was entirely out of his depth. They stopped at the opposite end of the long mahogany table, simply staring at me. I sat completely still in my leather chair, projecting absolute power and unbreakable confidence. "Welcome to my office," I said, my voice breaking the heavy silence. "Please take a seat. We have a lot of accounting to do." My father stood frozen at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. His eyes darted around the massive glass boardroom, taking in the sweeping views of the downtown skyline and the expensive modern art hanging on the walls. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no words came out. Vanessa practically collapsed into a plush leather chair, dropping her designer handbag onto the polished wood. Her hands were visibly shaking. Brad remained standing, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. He looked like a man walking directly to his own execution. He kept glancing at the frosted glass doors behind him, as if he expected the walls to physically close in on him. Before any of them could find their voice, the side door of the boardroom opened. Two high-powered corporate attorneys stepped into the room. They were senior partners at my firm, dressed in immaculate custom suits. They walked with the kind of aggressive confidence that only came from billing $1,000 an hour. They took their seats, flanking me on both sides, opening thick leather binders filled with financial documents. The visual power shift was absolute. I was no longer the quiet daughter living in the back house. I was the architect of their destruction, and I had an army of legal experts backing me up. I knew exactly how they had behaved downstairs in the lobby. My security director had already sent me the surveillance footage minutes before they arrived. When they first walked through the revolving glass doors, my father had marched up to the front desk, demanding that the receptionist treat him like a very important person. He had raised his voice, telling the security staff that he was Pastor Marcus, and he expected to be escorted to the clerical department immediately. Vanessa had scoffed at the marble columns, acting completely unimpressed, while Brad had aggressively tapped his foot, demanding VIP clearance. They had desperately tried to maintain their fragile superiority complex, but the moment the private elevator shot up to the executive floor and the polished mahogany doors opened, their pathetic illusions shattered. My father finally placed his hands on the table and leaned forward, trying to summon his booming pastoral voice. "Maya, what is the meaning of all this?" he demanded, though his voice lacked its usual commanding thunder. "Why are you sitting in an executive boardroom? We came here to get you to sign the release forms for the house. The bank made a terrible clerical mistake, and we need you to fix it immediately so we can go home." Vanessa chimed in, her tone shifting from arrogant to pleading. "Maya, tell these lawyers to leave us alone. Brad is under a lot of stress right now. You have no idea what is happening to our family today. The bank locked all our accounts and my friends are laughing at me. You need to do your job and correct the banking error so Brad can access his investment funds. I looked at my sister. The sheer level of her delusion was almost impressive. She genuinely believed I was just a lowly clerk who had accidentally pressed the wrong button on a computer keyboard. I slowly opened the thick folder resting in front of me. The first document was the official property deed for the historic Victorian house. I slid it smoothly across the long table. It stopped right in front of my father. "There is no banking error, Dad," I said, my voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. "And I am not a clerk. I am a senior forensic accountant for this firm. I specialize in dismantling massive corporate fraud networks. I am the person who freezes accounts, seizes stolen assets, and sends white-collar criminals to federal prison. And for the past 5 years, I have been the only person secretly paying the exorbitant property taxes on your house to keep it from being foreclosed." My father stared at the deed. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the overwhelming information. His jaw tightened as the reality of my success violently collided with his lifelong narrative of my failure. "You paid the taxes," he whispered, his eyes wide with genuine shock. "I did," I confirmed. "And because I did, I had the legal authority to place a hard asset freeze on the property the exact second you threw my belongings onto the front lawn." I turned my gaze toward Brad. The white finance bro flinched visibly as I looked at him. "Let us talk about your highly successful investments, Brad. I know absolutely everything. I know about Apex Vanguard Solutions. I know about the unregistered offshore cryptocurrency wallets. And most importantly, I know about the $3 million you borrowed from unregulated foreign lenders using a house you do not own as collateral." Brad gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning completely white. "Maya, please!" He choked out, his voice cracking with pure terror. "You cannot do this. They are going to kill me. You have to lift the freeze. I will pay it all back, I swear. I just need access to the equity in the house to cover the margin call." One of my corporate attorneys, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah, leaned forward. "Mr. Brad," she said, her tone like absolute ice, "my client will not be lifting any financial freezes today. Furthermore, anything you say in this room is being fully recorded and documented. You are currently facing multiple federal charges, including wire fraud and aggravated identity theft." Vanessa gasped and grabbed Brad by the arm. "Tell them they are lying, Brad," she cried. "Tell them you are a legitimate investor. Dad, tell her to stop making up these horrible lies." But my father was not looking at Vanessa. He was staring at the forged loan authorization form I had just slid next to the property deed. He recognized his own signature perfectly copied by the guilty man beside him. Before my father could fully process the reality of the forgery, the boardroom doors swung open one more time. A man in a cheap pinstripe suit strutted into the room carrying a battered leather briefcase. This was the sleazy lawyer Brad had managed to scrape together at the absolute last minute. He took one look at my sophisticated corporate attorneys and puffed out his chest, trying to look much larger and more important than he actually was. He slammed his briefcase onto the polished mahogany table, creating a loud, echoing thud that made Vanessa jump in her seat. He pointed a stubby finger directly at me. "Listen here, little lady," he barked, his voice overly loud and completely unprofessional. "My client, Mr. Brad, is a highly respected financial consultant. What you are doing here constitutes malicious, tortious interference with his legitimate business operations. You have illegally frozen his assets based on a completely fabricated interpretation of an outdated family trust. We are fully prepared to sue you, your firm, and anyone else involved for millions of dollars in punitive damages. Lift the property freeze right now, or I will have you arrested for corporate sabotage and extortion." I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I simply looked at the sweating lawyer and then shifted my gaze back to Brad. "You hired a man who buys his suits off the discount rack. To threaten a senior forensic accountant in her own corporate headquarters, I said softly. That is a remarkably bold strategy, Brad. Let us see exactly how it plays out for you. I reached into my leather folder and pulled out a single crisp piece of paper. It was not a thick stack of confusing legal jargon or a dense corporate contract. It was just one single page. A highly classified financial bank statement pulled directly from an unregulated offshore gambling syndicate. I slid the paper smoothly across the long table until it stopped right in front of Vanessa and Brad. Take a very good look at that document, Vanessa, I instructed, my voice cutting through the heavy tension like a razor blade. Your husband told you he was a brilliant investor. He told my father he was taking the church retirement funds and doubling them in high-yield cryptocurrency startups. He bragged about his massive returns at every single Sunday dinner while mocking my modest lifestyle. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes rapidly scanning the columns of numbers printed on the page. What is this? She whispered, her voice shaking with sudden uncertainty. That is the exact digital ledger of every single dollar your husband took from the elderly members of our church congregation, I explained, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. There were absolutely no real estate acquisitions. There were no cryptocurrency investments. He did not invest a single dime of their money into anything legitimate. He took $200,000 of the church building fund and the entire life savings of 30 elderly families, and he gambled it all away on high-stakes offshore digital poker. He lost $50,000 in a single night playing virtual blackjack while the people he stole from were sitting in church praying for financial blessings. Brad let out a pathetic whimpering sound. His sleazy lawyer suddenly stopped talking and stared at the paper, his arrogant posture completely deflating in an instant. But Vanessa absolutely refused to accept the horrifying truth. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being the wealthy, golden child married to a successful genius. She slammed her hand down on the table, her face turning bright red with desperate, furious denial. That is a complete lie, she screamed, pointing an accusing finger at me. You are lying, Maya. You forged this document just like you forged the property deed. You are so incredibly jealous of my beautiful life that you are making up these ridiculous stories to destroy my perfect marriage. Brad is a highly successful entrepreneur. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who wants everyone else to be as thoroughly miserable as you are. Vanessa continued her hysterical tirade, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive designer makeup. She turned to my father, seeking his ultimate validation and protection, just like she had done since we were children. Dad, tell her she is crazy, Vanessa pleaded aggressively, grabbing his arm. Tell her Brad would never do something like this. Brad bought you that luxury watch for your birthday. He paid for our exclusive country club memberships. He is a good man, Dad. You know he is a good man. But my father was completely silent. He was staring at the forged signature on the loan authorization and the gambling ledger sitting side by side on the mahogany table. The expensive luxury watch on his wrist suddenly looked exactly like a pair of heavy iron handcuffs. He was finally beginning to realize that every lavish gift Brad had ever given them was paid for with stolen money directly from his own trusting congregation. The sleazy lawyer cleared his throat, nervously breaking the awkward silence. He picked up the gambling ledger and read the federal tracking codes printed clearly at the top of the page. These are official Securities and Exchange Commission tracking watermarks, he muttered, his voice barely above a terrified whisper. He looked at Brad, his eyes wide with sudden blinding panic. You told me this was a simple family dispute over a piece of inherited real estate. You did not tell me the federal government was actively tracking stolen funds. I am not losing my license to practice law for a degenerate gambler. The lawyer quickly shoved the paper back across the table, grabbed his battered leather briefcase, and actually took a fast step toward the door. Brad reached out and grabbed his sleeve in pure desperation. You cannot leave me here, Brad begged, his voice cracking loudly. You are my legal counsel. You have to defend me. Defend yourself, The lawyer shot back viciously, ripping his arm away. You lied to me. This is federal wire fraud and international money laundering. I am a civil attorney, not a miracle worker. Good luck, buddy. The lawyer practically ran out of the massive boardroom, the heavy frosted glass doors swinging shut behind him, with a final defining click. The massive room descended into a suffocating absolute silence. Brad was left completely alone with no legal protection and no possible way out of the trap he had built. But Vanessa was somehow still fighting her completely losing battle. She crossed her arms tightly and glared at me with pure venom. So what if he lost a little bit of money? She demanded, her voice shrill and painfully desperate. All wealthy, sophisticated investors take risks, Maya. Sometimes the market goes down. That does not make my husband a criminal. Dad can just talk to the church board. He can explain that the funds are temporarily tied up in a liquidity transition. The congregation absolutely loves Dad. They will understand and wait. We just need you to lift the freeze on the house right now so Brad can get another loan to cover the temporary losses and fix everything. I looked at Vanessa with a deep, profound sense of pity. She was 30 years old and completely detached from the consequences of reality. You really do not understand what is happening right now. Do you, Vanessa? I asked, shaking my head slowly. This is not a temporary market fluctuation. This is a massive federal crime, and Dad cannot talk to the church board to save you because the church board already held an emergency meeting on Sunday morning. They voted unanimously to strip him of his pastoral title and lock him out of the building. My father let out a sharp, gasping sound, clutching his chest, as if he had been physically struck by a speeding car. Vanessa opened her mouth in pure, absolute shock. I turned my attention back to Brad, who was now openly weeping into his trembling hands. You brought a cheap lawyer to threaten me in my own corporate office, Brad. I said, my voice entirely devoid of mercy or compassion. You tried to bully the one person holding the absolute undeniable proof of your massive guilt. You played a very dangerous game with arrogant, blind confidence, but your bluff has officially been called. The lies are finally over. The heavy silence following my words was suddenly broken by a chair scraping violently. My father stood up. His posture shifted. The defeated old man vanished, and the theatrical pastor returned. He turned his glaring eyes toward Brad, pointing a trembling finger at his son-in-law. He let out a roar of manufactured outrage. How dare you, Brad, my father shouted, echoing off the glass walls. How dare you defile the sacred trust of my congregation? I welcomed you into my family. I gave you my beautiful daughter, and you used my position to steal from widows. You are a degenerate criminal. You manipulated me with smooth-talking Wall Street lies. I had no idea you were gambling with the building fund. Brad looked at my father with wide, terrified eyes. His jaw dropped in pure shock at the ruthless betrayal. My father was throwing him entirely under the bus to save his sinking reputation. Vanessa sat frozen, looking back and forth as the two men she worshipped began tearing each other apart. My father did not stop there. He turned back to me, forcing a sickly sweet smile. He actually tried to align himself with me. Maya, my brilliant daughter, he said, his tone dripping with fake affection. Thank God you uncovered this demonic scheme. You saved our family from this monster. We need to have Brad arrested. You and I can go to the church board. We can explain that Brad acted entirely alone. Just lift the freeze on the house so I can secure a loan to quietly refund the congregation. We can fix this as a family. I stared at the man who had called me a parasite just 10 days ago. The manipulative narcissism required to pivot from hating me to praising me in seconds was impressive. He was willing to sacrifice Brad to federal prison if it meant keeping his pastoral title. He actually thought I was desperate enough for his fatherly approval that I would help him cover up a massive crime. I raised my hand, silencing his frantic rambling. Do not call me your brilliant daughter, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch. Do not pretend you are the innocent victim of a con artist. You are a fully complicit participant. My father stiffened. His fake smile vanished instantly. I did not know anything about the gambling, Maya, he insisted, stepping backward. I swear I thought he was investing legally. I am innocent. You might not have known about the digital poker, I replied, reaching for my laptop, but you absolutely knew the money was misappropriated. You knew Brad was entirely unqualified. You knew the loan documents were highly illegal, and you actively helped hide evidence. I tapped the trackpad on my encrypted laptop. A digital audio file appeared on the massive screen. Let us listen to a voicemail you left on Brad Burner phone exactly 3 weeks ago, I said. I pressed play. The pristine acoustic design of the boardroom amplified the audio perfectly. My father's voice filled the room clear and undeniable. It was a sneaky, hushed tone he used when he thought nobody else was listening. Brad, listen to me. The recorded voice of my father echoed. Deacon Hayes is asking to see the quarterly audit reports for the building fund. He is getting suspicious about the missing $200,000. I took the ledger out of the church office and locked it in my safe. I can delay the board another month, but you need to get that commercial loan approved immediately. Tell the underwriters whatever they need to hear. Forged signatures, inflated appraisals. I do not care what it takes. Just get the cash so I can balance the church books before the annual review. And do not forget you promised to cover my country club renewal fees. Call me back. The recording ended with a sharp click. The silence that followed was completely suffocating. My father's legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed backward into his heavy leather chair, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly incredibly old. Vanessa covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a muffled sob. Her perfect father, the holy man who could do no wrong, had just been exposed as a greedy hypocrite who conspired to defraud his own people just to pay for a country club membership. Brad let out a bitter, pathetic laugh, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. You threw me directly to the wolves, Marcus. Brad sneered, his voice trembling. But you are going down right next to me. You helped me hide the stolen money. You wanted the illegal kickbacks. We are both going to federal prison together. I closed my laptop firmly. You chose greed over your faithful congregation, Dad, I said, looking directly into his terrified eyes. You traded your spiritual integrity for luxury watches and golf course memberships. You deliberately allowed Brad to steal from elderly widows because you wanted to look wealthy and powerful. You threw my belongings onto the front lawn because you thought I was a threat to your perfect image. But your image was nothing but a cheap illusion built entirely on stolen money and desperate lies. The church board did not just fire you yesterday morning. They immediately forwarded your internal financial records to the federal authorities. You are no longer a respected pastor in our community. You are a documented co-conspirator in a massive federal fraud case. I sat at the head of the boardroom table feeling an overwhelming sense of finality. For my entire life, he used his booming voice from the pulpit to command respect and demand total obedience. He used religion as a weapon to make me feel small. Now, his own recorded words had become the exact weapon that dismantled his false empire. The heavy frosted glass doors that had just swung shut suddenly pushed open again. The sleazy lawyer stepped back into the massive boardroom, his face flushed and covered in a fresh layer of nervous sweat. He walked back to the mahogany table, avoiding eye contact with my sophisticated corporate attorneys, and pointed a trembling finger at the legal release forms he had left behind. Listen to me, he stammered, his voice lacking all of its previous arrogant confidence. The federal authorities might be building a case, but the immediate problem is the $3 million margin call from the unregulated foreign lenders. Miss Maya, if you just sign over the house deed to my client, right now we can transfer the property directly to the creditors. You have the power to stop this entire disaster with one single signature. Vanessa eagerly jumped on the lawyer, desperate logic. Yes, Maya, she pleaded, leaning across the table with wild, frantic eyes. Please, just sign the paper. Just give it to Brad so we can pay off these dangerous people. Dad needs you to do this. We are begging you to save our lives. My father nodded vigorously, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. He was a completely broken man, willing to sacrifice his mother's historic legacy just to save his own skin. "Do it, Maya," he commanded, trying to muster a fraction of his old pastoral authority. "It is your duty as a daughter. Sign the deed over to Brad." I looked at the three of them. A sleazy lawyer, a deceitful sister, and a corrupt father, all demanding that I surrender the only thing my grandmother worked her entire life to build. I calmly reached into my leather folder and pulled out a thick parchment document bound with a heavy blue legal seal. "This is the original master file of the Eleanor Estate Trust," I announced, placing the document on the polished wood. "You all seem to be operating under the false assumption that my father is the legal owner of the Victorian house. You think I have the ability to simply transfer the deed to offshore criminals to pay off Brad gambling debts." The sleazy lawyer frowned his brow, furrowing in deep confusion. "The county tax records clearly list Pastor Marcus as the primary beneficiary of the estate," he argued weakly. "He has the legal authority to use it as collateral." "He had the legal authority," I corrected, my voice slicing through the room with absolute precision. My grandmother Eleanor was a brilliant woman. She knew he possessed a dangerous combination of massive ego and profound financial incompetence. So when she drafted her final will, she included a very specific protective contingency. I opened the heavy parchment document to the third page. I ran my manicured finger down the dense legal text until I found the highlighted section. I looked directly into my father's terrified eyes as I began to read the clause aloud. Article 4, Section B. I read, my voice steady and commanding. "The primary residence shall remain under the stewardship of Marcus on one absolute, unalterable condition. Maya must be permitted to reside on the premises unhindered and undisturbed for as long as she desires. If Maya is ever forcefully evicted by Marcus, or if her residency is terminated without her explicit written consent, Marcus immediately forfeits all rights, titles, and inheritance. The estate instantly transfers into an irrevocable trust controlled entirely and exclusively by Maya." The silence that fell over the boardroom was so profound, you could hear the subtle hum of the air conditioning vents. My father's face turned the color of wet ash. Brad let out a low, agonizing groan, dropping his head onto the table. Vanessa stared at the parchment document, her mouth hanging open in silent, horrified disbelief. "Do you understand what this means, Dad?" I asked, breaking the heavy silence. 10 days ago, you stood on the front porch and called me a parasite. You demanded that I face the real world. You allowed Brad to kick my books, and you formally told me to get off your property. But the exact second my vintage suitcases hit the concrete steps, you legally activated my grandmother's hidden fail-safe. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and steepled my fingers. "You threw my belongings onto the lawn 10 days ago, and by doing so, you permanently handed me the entire multi-million-dollar estate. The deed automatically transferred into my irrevocable trust. The house is completely untouchable. It cannot be used as collateral or seized by foreign lenders." The sleazy lawyer visibly swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously. He looked at Brad with a mixture of absolute disgust and genuine pity. "You leveraged a ghost asset," he whispered. "You forged a signature on a property your father-in-law did not own. You committed federal fraud for absolutely nothing." Brad began to hyperventilate, his chest heaving rapidly as the walls of reality finally crushed him. The foreign lenders he owed money to were ruthless, violent people. He had promised them a historic estate, and now he had absolutely nothing to give them. Vanessa buried her face in her hands and began to wail loudly, her cries echoing off the glass walls. My father stared blankly at the polished mahogany table, his entire world completely destroyed by his own arrogant actions. "Sign the release forms," the lawyer pleaded one last time, his voice cracking. "Miss Maya, there must be some legal loophole. You can dissolve the trust. You can liquidate the asset. You have to do something, or my client is a dead man." I looked at my ruined family. I closed the heavy parchment document and slid it back into my leather folder. "I am not dissolving anything," I said coldly. "My grandmother built that house with her own 2 hands, and I will never let you feed her legacy to a pack of offshore loan sharks." The sheer finality of my words hit Vanessa like a physical blow. The absolute denial she had been clinging to for the past 2 days finally snapped. She turned her head slowly to look at Brad, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. "You ruined my life!" she screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet boardroom. She lunged forward, hitting Brad on the shoulder with her expensive designer handbag. "You lied to me. You promised me we were rich. You told me you were a financial genius, and I believed you. Now I am going to be the laughingstock of the entire country club. My friends are already blocking my phone number. The florist is suing me. How am I supposed to raise a baby with a man who is going to federal prison? You are completely worthless, Brad." Brad did not even try to defend himself. He just sat there absorbing her blows, his face buried in his hands. He looked like a hollow shell of the arrogant finance bro who used to lecture me about smart investments. "Stop hitting me, Vanessa," he muttered weakly, raising his arms to shield his face. "Just stop. I was trying to give you the lifestyle you demanded. You wanted the luxury cars and the expensive vacations to the Bahamas. You wanted the diamond necklaces. Where did you think the money was coming from? I did it all for you and your greedy family." Vanessa gasped, pulling back as if she had been burned. She spun around to face our father. "Dad, do something," she cried, stomping her foot on the polished marble floor like a spoiled toddler. "You are the head of this family. You are Pastor Marcus. Tell her to fix this right now. Order her to sign the papers. I cannot go bankrupt, Dad. I cannot live in a cheap apartment and buy discount clothes. You have to save me from this nightmare." My father looked at his golden child. For the first time in his life, he had absolutely no authority to comfort her. He realized his pastoral title meant nothing in this room. He slowly turned his gaze back to me. The proud, arrogant man who commanded hundreds of people every Sunday swallowed his massive ego. He walked around the large mahogany table and stood right in front of my chair. He clasped his hands together in a posture of desperate prayer. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I know I have been hard on you. I know I said terrible things on that porch, but we are family. Blood is thicker than water. We share the same name. You cannot turn your back on your own flesh and blood. You have to forgive us, too. We made a mistake, but we can heal from this if you just show a little grace. Do not let them destroy your sister. Do not let them destroy my church and my legacy. Be the bigger person, Maya." I looked at his clasped hands and felt absolutely nothing. No sympathy, no guilt, no familial obligation. Family. I repeated the word, tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. "Do not dare use that word with me, Dad. Family is supposed to protect you. Family is supposed to lift you up when you are struggling. But you never treated me like family. You treated me like a disposable servant. You treated me like a silent ATM machine that existed solely to fund your arrogant lifestyle and protect your fragile public image." I stood up slowly, towering over him despite his physical height. "For 5 years I lived in a drafty back house while you paraded around in custom suits bought with stolen money. I paid your property taxes. I kept the lights on. I protected grandmother Eleanor and her legacy, while you constantly reminded me how much of a disappointment I was, because I did not marry a wealthy fraud like Brad. You watched Vanessa mock me at every single Sunday dinner. You allowed Brad to kick my belongings across the lawn. You stood on the porch and smiled while you threw me away like garbage. My father tried to reach out and touch my arm, but I stepped back, my eyes blazing with cold, calculated fury. You only remember we are family now because you are completely out of options and staring at a prison sentence." I continued, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "When you thought you had millions of dollars, you called me a parasite. You told me to face the real world. Well, Dad, this is the real world. This is what happens when you build an empire on lies and try to crush the only person holding the structural pillars together." My father opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, silencing him instantly. "There is no forgiveness today," I stated coldly. "I am not signing over the deed. I am not dissolving the trust. I am not lifting the financial freeze. I am not calling the bank to clear your credit cards. You made your choices, and now you are going to live with the exact consequences of your blinding greed. I will not save you. I shifted my gaze past my father and locked eyes with Brad. He was staring at the floor, completely broken, shivering in his expensive suit. I lifted my left wrist and looked at my designer watch. The polished silver hands ticked forward with absolute mechanical precision. Brad, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm that made the entire room hold its breath. I highly suggest you say goodbye to your beautiful wife right now. I suggest you apologize to my father for ruining his life, because you have exactly 5 minutes before your life completely ends. Vanessa stopped crying and looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. What do you mean? She whispered, her voice shaking. What happens in 5 minutes? I smiled a cold, ruthless smile. I did not answer her. I simply sat back down in my leather chair, folded my hands over the thick financial dossier, and watched the second hand on my watch slowly sweep across the dial. The countdown had officially begun, and there was absolutely nothing any of them could do to stop it. The silence in the boardroom was absolute and terrifying. For exactly 4 minutes and 50 seconds, nobody dared to speak a single word. The only sound was the faint rhythmic ticking of the silver second hand sweeping across the dial of my designer watch. I sat perfectly still, with my hands folded, resting on top of the financial dossier. Vanessa had stopped her hysterical crying. She was staring at the heavy frosted glass doors, as if a monster was about to break through. My father stood frozen near the edge of the mahogany table, his chest rising and falling in shallow, terrified gasps. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, waiting for the lever to be pulled. Brad was practically hyperventilating. His expensive tailored suit was now completely soaked with cold sweat. He kept wiping his trembling hands on his slacks, his eyes darting wildly around the room, searching for an exit that simply did not exist. The sleazy lawyer, who had desperately returned to beg for the deed, was now pressed against the back wall, trying to make himself invisible. 5 seconds left. 4, 3, 2, 1. I looked up from my watch and locked eyes with Brad. Time is up, I announced, my voice echoing with chilling finality. Right on cue, the heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom were forcefully pushed open. The polished brass handles slammed against the interior walls with a deafening crash. Agent Harris strode into the room, accompanied by 4 heavily armed federal agents wearing dark tactical vests with the letters FBI emblazoned in bold yellow across their chests. The luxurious corporate boardroom was instantly transformed into an active federal crime scene. The air was suddenly sucked out of the room. Agent Harris stepped forward, his face set in a mask of absolute authority. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to display his gold badge. Brad, he barked, his voice easily overpowering the stunned silence. You are under arrest for multiple federal violations, including wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and international money laundering. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. Brad did not stand up and surrender. The sheer reality of federal prison shattered his brain, completely triggering a desperate primal flight response. He let out a pathetic, high-pitched scream and bolted out of his chair. He did not run toward the main doors where Agent Harris stood. Instead, he spun around and sprinted frantically toward the secondary glass doors that led to the private maintenance hallway. He actually thought his expensive gym workouts and country club tennis matches gave him the physical ability to outrun highly trained federal agents. Before his luxury loafers could even cross half the distance of the marble floor, 2 tactical agents lunged forward. They hit him with the combined force of a freight train. Brad slammed violently into the polished marble, sliding several feet before crashing into the base of a heavy decorative planter. The impact knocked the wind completely out of his lungs. He gasped wildly, thrashing his arms and legs like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. "Stop resisting," one of the agents shouted, driving his knee firmly between Brad's shoulder blades and pinning him flat against the cold stone floor. The sound of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Brad's wrists echoed through the boardroom. The arrogant white finance bro who had stood on my lawn and confidently told me to earn my keep in America was now pressing his bruised face against the floor, weeping uncontrollably. His profound sense of privilege evaporated in a matter of seconds. But the sleazy lawyer was not stepping forward to defend his client. The lawyer took one look at the federal tactical vests and realized his career was hanging by a microscopic thread. The lawyer quietly slid his files into his battered leather briefcase. He clicked the brass locks shut, lowered his head, and silently slipped out the open doors, blending into the corporate hallway and abandoning Brad entirely to his grim fate. Vanessa let out a blood-curdling shriek as the agents hauled her husband up from the floor. Brad's suit was torn and his face was smeared with dirt and tears. He looked absolutely pathetic. "Let him go!" Vanessa screamed, lunging forward with her arms outstretched. A female federal agent immediately stepped into her path, holding up a stern hand. "Step back, ma'am." The agent warned, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Interfere with a federal arrest, and you will be placed in handcuffs right next to him." Vanessa froze instantly, her self-preservation overriding her loyalty. She backed away, covering her mouth and sobbing hysterically as she watched the love of her life being treated like a common criminal. My father remained completely paralyzed. He stared blankly at the metal handcuffs digging into Brad's wrists, realizing that the wealth and prestige he had worshipped were nothing but a fast track to absolute ruin. I slowly stood up from my leather chair and walked around the mahogany table, stopping just a few feet away from where Brad was being held by the agents. He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, a mixture of pure hatred and absolute defeat written across his bruised face. "You thought you could throw me out like trash." "Brad," I said, my voice perfectly level. "You thought you were untouchable because of your arrogant assumptions and your stolen money. But in the real world, actions have severe consequences." "Get him out of here right now," Agent Harris loudly ordered. The agents pulled him roughly to his feet, ignoring his desperate pleas for mercy as they dragged him forward. He stumbled over his own expensive shoes, his legs barely able to support his weight. The heavy boardroom doors swung shut behind them, cutting off his pathetic, echoing sobs entirely. The room grew completely quiet once again, leaving my shattered family behind forever. The heavy boardroom doors swung shut behind them, cutting off his pathetic, echoing sobs entirely. The room grew completely quiet once again, leaving my shattered family behind forever. Vanessa remained frozen in her plush leather chair, staring blankly at the polished marble floor where her husband had just been violently tackled. The expensive designer handbag she had clutched like a shield earlier had fallen to the ground, spilling its contents across the stone. My father stood near the edge of the mahogany table, looking exactly like a hollow shell. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting wildly around the room as if searching for a time machine to magically undo the last 10 days. Before he could formulate a single excuse or attempt to salvage any remaining fraction of his dignity, the frosted glass doors opened one more time. It was not another heavily armed federal agent. It was an older gentleman dressed in a modest, well-worn gray suit, holding a worn leather Bible and a thick manila envelope. It was Deacon Hayes. He stepped into the massive corporate boardroom, his eyes scanning the opulent surroundings before finally resting on my father. The look on the deacon face was not one of rage. It was a look of profound, devastating disappointment that cut far deeper than any anger ever could. My father flinched visibly when he saw the deacon. For the first time in his arrogant life, the proud pastor could not meet the eyes of a member of his own congregation. Deacon Hayes walked slowly toward the long table, his footsteps echoing sharply in the quiet room. Marcus the deacon said, his voice heavy with sorrow and absolute betrayal. He did not call him pastor. That single intentional omission struck my father harder than a physical blow to the chest. I spent the entire weekend sitting in the living rooms of our elderly widows, trying to explain to them why their life savings are completely gone, the deacon continued. I had to look Sister Jenkins directly in the eye and tell her that the money she carefully saved for her husband's memorial service was gambled away by your son-in-law, while you actively helped hide the ledger. My father opened his mouth, stammering, trying desperately to find the smooth, manipulative words that had always saved him in the past. Deacon, please, you have to understand, he pleaded. I was terribly deceived. I did not know the extent of Brad's criminal activities. I am a victim here too. Deacon Hayes shook his head slowly, his expression hardening into absolute unforgiving resolve. You are no victim, Marcus the deacon stated firmly. You are a wolf in sheep clothing. We trusted you to shepherd this community, and instead you sold us out to fund your own vanity and your country club lifestyle. Deacon Hayes placed the thick manila envelope on the mahogany table right in front of my father, trembling hands. The church board held an emergency vote yesterday morning. The decision was unanimous. You are officially terminated from your position, effective immediately. Your pastoral credentials have been permanently revoked. Your office has already been cleared out and your personal items are sitting in a cardboard box by the back dumpster. The locks on the sanctuary doors were changed last night. You are legally barred from stepping onto church property ever again. My father stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. His entire identity, his power, and his prestige were completely dismantled inside that thin paper package. But the deacon was not finished delivering the consequences. Furthermore, Deacon Hayes continued. The 30 families whose retirement funds were stolen have retained very aggressive legal counsel. They are filing a massive civil class action lawsuit against you personally for gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and complicity in financial fraud. They are going to take absolutely everything you own, Marcus. Your cars, your bank accounts, your pension, everything. The crushing reality of those words destroyed the last remaining fragments of my father's massive ego. The man who had demanded total obedience from everyone around him suddenly realized he was about to be completely destitute. He would have no church, no salary, no respect, and absolutely no way to pay the millions of dollars in restitution he owed the angry congregation. His legs gave out beneath him. Pastor Marcus, the man who had stood on the front porch of our historic family home in a custom-tailored suit and called me a parasite, dropped directly to his knees on the cold marble floor of my corporate boardroom. He crawled forward, reaching out with trembling hands to grab the hem of my designer suit skirt. Maya, he sobbed, his voice cracking with pure, pathetic desperation. Maya, please, you have to help me. You are a senior forensic accountant. You have millions of dollars in that trust fund. You live in a penthouse. You can afford to hire the best defense attorneys in the country. You can pay off the civil suits. You can fix this mess. Please, I am your father. I gave you life. Do not let them take everything from me. Do not let me die in poverty. Vanessa watched him grovel, her own tears flowing silently, finally realizing that the man she thought was an untouchable king was actually just a weak, greedy coward. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the top of his graying head. I felt the comforting weight of Grandmother Eleanor's legacy, safe and secure behind an impenetrable legal wall. I looked at the man who had spent 33 years making me feel completely worthless simply because I refused to worship his false image. I thought about the day he threw my vintage suitcases onto the grass. I thought about the cruel laughter he shared with Brad and Vanessa while I silently packed my belongings. I took a deep breath, letting the absolute power of the moment settle over the room. Get up off the floor, Marcus, I commanded, my voice icy and completely void of sympathy. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with desperate hope, falsely thinking I was going to offer him a lifeline. I leaned down slightly, making sure my words were perfectly clear and impossible to misunderstand. I am not paying for your defense attorneys, I said smoothly. I am not paying off your civil lawsuits. I am not giving you a single dime of the money I earned while you were busy parading around in stolen luxury. His face crumpled in pure horror. But Maya, how am I supposed to survive? He pleaded, tears streaming down his face. I have no money. I have no job. How am I supposed to pay for any of this? I looked him directly in the eyes and delivered the final devastating blow, feeding his exact words back to him. You are a grown man. You have to earn your keep. 2 weeks passed since the explosive confrontation in my corporate boardroom. The dust finally settled over the shattered remains of my family, but the severe consequences of their actions were only just beginning to take root in the real world. The federal justice system moved with ruthless efficiency. Brad was formally indicted on 24 counts of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and international money laundering. During his arraignment hearing, his newly appointed public defender practically begged the judge to grant him bail. But the federal prosecutor presented the massive dossier I had compiled, proving Brad had extensive ties to unregulated foreign lenders and offshore cryptocurrency accounts. The judge immediately declared him a massive flight risk and remanded him to federal custody without the possibility of bail. The arrogant finance bro, who once kicked my belongings across the lawn, was now sitting in a 6 by 8 foot concrete cell, wearing an oversized orange jumpsuit. He was facing a mandatory minimum of 20 years in federal prison. There would be no country club tennis matches or luxury vacations to the Bahamas for the next 2 decades. He was completely erased from high society. While Brad was locked away dealing with the terrifying reality of federal prison, Vanessa was experiencing a completely different kind of nightmare on the outside. The government seized all of their connected bank accounts and physical assets to pay back the stolen church retirement funds. The luxury apartment they leased was immediately repossessed by the property management group. Vanessa was heavily pregnant and completely broke. For her entire life, she had been the beautiful golden child, whose every mistake was instantly erased by our father. But Pastor Marcus was currently drowning under a tidal wave of civil lawsuits and had absolutely nothing left to give her. Left with zero options, Vanessa was forced to pack whatever clothes she could carry into black garbage bags and move into a cheap rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. The woman who had thrown a $30,000 baby shower just a few weeks ago was now standing in line at the local government office applying for emergency food stamps and state-funded health insurance. Her wealthy socialite friends had entirely abandoned her the second her credit cards started declining. She was completely isolated in a harsh reality she had never bothered to understand. On a quiet Tuesday evening, I was sitting in my penthouse reviewing a new client portfolio when my personal phone began to ring. I looked at the screen and saw Vanessa calling. I let it ring 3 times before finally pressing the accept button. I brought the phone to my ear and waited in absolute silence. I did not offer a comforting greeting. Maya. Please, Vanessa. Sobbed her voice, echoing with a hollow, desperate exhaustion. Please do not hang up on me. I have absolutely nowhere else to go. I listened to her cry. The sound did not evoke any sympathy or guilt. It was simply the sound of consequences arriving exactly on schedule. What do you want, Vanessa? I asked, my voice perfectly level and professional. I cannot stay in this awful place anymore, she cried, her voice cracking loudly over the speaker. The motel room smells like stale smoke and mold. The air conditioning is broken, and I am 8 months pregnant, Maya. I am sleeping on a mattress that feels like concrete. I had to use food stamps to buy bread today. People looked at me like I was absolute trash. I am so scared, and I am so incredibly tired. Please, Maya, you have a massive penthouse. You own the historic Victorian house, free and clear. Let me come live with you. Just until the baby is born. Just until Brad sorts out his legal trouble. Please be a good sister and help me. Her sheer delusion was still incredibly staggering. She actually thought Brad was going to miraculously sort out his massive federal fraud case. She still thought she was entitled to live in luxury at my personal expense. She thought a few tears could completely erase decades of emotional abuse and pure cruelty. You are not moving into my penthouse, Vanessa, I stated firmly, shutting down her fantasy immediately. And you are certainly not moving into the Victorian house. You stood on the porch and laughed, while I was forcefully evicted. You mocked my career and demanded my money to pay for your expensive flowers. You made your bed with a convicted criminal, and now you have to sleep in it, even if that bed is in a cheap roadside motel. Vanessa gasped, letting out a loud, agonizing wail. You are a monster, Maya, she screamed, her desperation turning quickly back into her familiar toxic entitlement. I am your pregnant sister. I am carrying your nephew. How can you be so cruel and heartless? Do you want my baby to suffer just to punish me? Send me some cash then. Just wire me $10,000 so I can rent a decent apartment and buy a crib. You have millions of dollars. 10,000 is absolutely nothing to you. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair looking out at the glowing city skyline. I am not a monster, Vanessa, I replied calmly. And I am not going to let an innocent child suffer because his parents are greedy criminals. But I am never handing you a single dime of my cash. You do not know how to manage money, and you would probably use it to hire a useless lawyer for Brad. Then what am I supposed to do? She sobbed, completely defeated. I have already instructed my wealth manager to set up a restricted medical trust fund, I explained. I will pay for all of your prenatal doctor appointments directly to the hospital billing department. When the baby is born, I will cover the hospital delivery fees. I have also set up a direct vendor account with a local pharmacy and a grocery delivery service. They will drop off diapers, baby formula, and essential groceries to your motel room every single week. The bills will be sent directly to my corporate office. The baby will be perfectly safe, fed, and medically protected. Vanessa was silent for a long moment. But what about me? She whispered selfishly. What about my clothes and my rent and my life? You are a grown woman, Vanessa. I said, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. You need to get a job. You need to learn how to budget your food stamps and pay your own motel rent. You are finally going to learn what it means to actually earn your keep in America. I am protecting my nephew, but I am absolutely done protecting you. Welcome to the real world. I pressed the end button and permanently blocked her number, knowing the golden child was finally forced to face the harsh reality of her own terrible choices. The morning after I permanently blocked Vanessa from my life, I woke up with a singular purpose. It was finally time to reclaim the physical foundation of my family history. I dressed in comfortable jeans and a simple sweater, leaving my corporate suits in the closet. I drove through the familiar tree-lined streets and pulled up to the massive Victorian house. The heavy iron bank padlocks that secured the front gates for the past 2 weeks were completely gone. My legal team had officially processed the irrevocable trust documents with the county. Federal fraud investigators formally released the property once they verified the deed was entirely mine. I walked up the driveway and climbed the concrete steps where my vintage suitcases had been dumped just a month ago. I slid the heavy brass key into the front door and turned it. The deadbolt clicked open with a heavy thud. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The silence inside the massive house was absolutely deafening. For my entire childhood, this space had been filled with my father, booming sermons, Vanessa, loud complaints, and the constant superficial chatter of their wealthy guests. Now it was completely empty. The bank had seized all the luxury furniture and expensive electronics to help pay back the stolen congregation funds. What remained were the gaudy decorations my father had permanently attached to the walls. I walked through the foyer looking at the sheer vanity of Pastor Marcus. He had covered my grandmother beautiful original oak paneling with cheap gold leaf trim. Above the main fireplace, he had mounted a gigantic oil portrait of himself, posing in his pastoral robes, looking down on everyone. I walked straight into the kitchen, grabbed a heavy crowbar from the utility drawer, and marched back into the living room. I did not hire a demolition crew for this specific task. I needed to do this myself. I climbed onto a sturdy chair and forcefully jammed the edge of the crowbar behind the heavy frame of his portrait. With one hard pull, the nails shrieked and the painting crashed violently to the hardwood floor. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces over his painted, arrogant face. It felt incredibly therapeutic. For the next 3 hours, I walked through the empty halls, systematically stripping away every single trace of my father-gaudy presence. I scraped away the tacky gold trim from the crown molding. I ripped up the expensive imported rugs that hid the original hardwood floors. With every layer of fake luxury, I peeled away the house, seemed to breathe deeper. The solid historic bones of the property began to reveal themselves once again. Grandmother Eleanor's spirit was still here, buried beneath decades of blinding ego. By the time I finished the front rooms, my hands were blistered, and my sweater was covered in dust, but my soul felt lighter than it had in 33 years. A heavy knock on the open front door broke my peaceful silence. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and walked into the foyer. Standing on the porch was Elias, the lead architect I had hired earlier in the week. He was holding a thick roll of blueprints. "Welcome to the property, Elias," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "It looks like you already started the demolition process," he observed, looking at the shattered portrait. "Just removing the bad energy," I replied with a genuine smile. "Let me show you the space." We walked through the empty rooms and I outlined my exact vision. I was not going to live in this house. It was too large and carried too much heavy history. Instead, I was going to transform the site of my greatest humiliation into a powerful legacy. "This massive living room will be the primary lecture hall," I explained, pointing to the vast open space. "We need to install smart boards and presentation podiums. The formal dining room where my family held their exclusive dinner parties will be converted into a state-of-the-art computer lab. Upstairs, we are going to knock down the walls between the master suites to build private consultation rooms." Elias took rapid notes, marking up the blueprints. "And what is the official name of the facility?" he asked. "The Eleanor Heritage Foundation," I answered proudly. "It is going to be a dedicated financial literacy center specifically designed for young African American women. We are going to teach them how to read complicated contracts, how to build sustainable credit, and how to establish ironclad trusts to protect their assets. They will learn how to spot white-collar predators like Brad and how to legally defend themselves against financial abuse." Elias looked around the sunlit room, his eyes shining with respect. "That is an incredibly powerful mission, Maya," he said. "You are taking a historic building and using it to build a much stronger future for the community. We can have the construction crews here by Monday morning to start the renovations." We shook hands again, and Elias walked back out to his truck. I stood alone in the center of the massive room. The toxic shadow my father cast over this family was officially erased. They tried to break me down and cast me out, but instead they accidentally handed me the exact tools I needed to build an empire of education and empowerment. I was turning my deep generational trauma into a fortress of absolute independence. Grandmother Eleanor fought through unimaginable prejudice to buy this land. She wanted her descendants to have a solid foundation they could rely on when the world turned cruel. My father almost destroyed that dream because he was blinded by greed. Now I was going to finally ensure that her original dream not only survived, but multiplied across an entire generation. I took one last look at the beautiful floors, locked the heavy front door behind me, and walked down the steps feeling a profound sense of total victory. 6 months passed since the day I stood in the empty Victorian house and finalized my plans with Elias the architect. The transformation of the property was nothing short of miraculous. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere that my father had cultivated for decades was entirely eradicated. The Eleanor Heritage Foundation was now fully operational. From Monday to Friday, the massive living rooms and formal dining areas were filled with brilliant young African American women learning about investment portfolios, trust funds, and corporate legal defense. But today was Sunday. And for the first time in my entire life, I was hosting a traditional Sunday dinner in this house that actually felt like a blessing instead of a battlefield. I stood in the completely remodeled kitchen, pulling a massive roasted turkey from the double oven. The rich, savory smell of soul food filled the air, replacing the stale scent of arrogance and forced politeness that used to permeate these walls. I carried the heavy platter into the main dining room and placed it in the center of the long wooden table. I looked around at the people taking their seats. There was no golden child sister demanding attention. There was no narcissistic father delivering lectures from the head of the table. And there was certainly no sleazy brother-in-law bragging about stolen money. Instead, the table was surrounded by my chosen family. Deacon Hayes sat near the window looking completely at peace. He had successfully guided the church congregation through the massive legal battle, recovering a significant portion of their stolen retirement funds by liquidating my father's remaining assets. Next to him sat David, my private wealth manager, and Sarah, the fierce corporate attorney who had flanked me during the boardroom confrontation. The rest of the chairs were filled with my true friends and the dedicated mentors who had supported me throughout my career. These were the people who knew my actual worth long before I inherited a multi-million-dollar estate. We passed the dishes around the table, sharing genuine laughter and honest stories. Nobody was trying to outsmart anyone else. Nobody was belittling my career or questioning my choices. The contrast between this beautiful evening and the agonizing Sunday dinners of my past was absolutely staggering. I took my seat at the head of the table, pouring a glass of sparkling cider, and let the warm, joyful noise wash over me. As I watched my chosen family celebrate, I allowed myself a moment of deep internal reflection. Society constantly pushes the narrative that blood is thicker than water. We are taught to endure unimaginable disrespect and emotional abuse simply because the people hurting us share our last name. We are told to forgive the unforgivable in the name of family loyalty. But the last 6 months taught me the absolute truth. Blood does not excuse blatant abuse. Loyalty should never demand your total self-destruction. Cutting off toxic family members is not an act of cruelty or bitterness. It is the ultimate form of self-respect. I had to let my father lose his empire to protect an entire community of innocent people. Pastor Marcus was currently working a minimum wage job stocking shelves at a local grocery store, his wages heavily garnished to pay restitution to his former congregation. I had to let Brad face federal prison to stop his ruthless financial predation. And I had to let Vanessa fall from her pedestal so she could finally learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. Last I heard, she was working as a receptionist and raising her son in a modest apartment fully funded by her own paycheck. I was paying for my nephew's medical care just as I promised, but I had not spoken a single word to my sister since she called me from that motel. I felt absolutely no guilt. I had simply stopped shielding them from the consequences of their own terrible choices. Deacon Hayes stood up and gently tapped his spoon against his glass, drawing the attention of the room. He raised his glass toward me, a warm, proud smile on his face. To Maya, he said, his voice steady and sincere. You took a house built on history, saved it from a foundation of lies, and turned it into a beacon of truth for the next generation. Eleanor would be incredibly proud of the woman you have become. To Eleanor, I replied, raising my glass as the rest of the table echoed the sentiment. The toast warmed my chest, completely validating the grueling journey I had survived. I had finally won my peace. I turned away from the table, looking directly forward, reflecting on the incredible sequence of events that started with my belongings scattered across the grass. If you are watching this and you are currently suffocating under the weight of a toxic family, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You do not owe your sanity to the people who consistently tear you down. You are allowed to set hard boundaries. You are allowed to walk away from the table when respect is no longer being served. You are allowed to protect your peace, your assets, and your future. Sometimes the trash takes itself out to the lawn. Let it stay there. Have you ever had to establish a firm boundary with a toxic family member, or completely cut ties to protect your own mental health and future? How did you find the courage to finally walk away? I would love to read your stories and build a supportive community in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, financial independence, and reclaiming your absolute worth. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with a difficult family dynamic and needs to hear that they are not alone. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, your life belongs to you and nobody else. Keep building your empire. The story of Maya teaches us a profound and often uncomfortable truth. Biological ties do not entitle anyone to repeatedly cross your boundaries or subject you to emotional and financial abuse. Society constantly pushes the narrative that blood is thicker than water, conditioning us to forgive the unforgivable in the name of family loyalty. However, the most empowering lesson from this narrative is that cutting ties with toxic relatives is not an act of bitterness. It is the ultimate form of self-respect. When Maya's father and sister were faced with the catastrophic consequences of their own criminal greed, they immediately weaponized the word family to demand a bailout. They expected her to set herself on fire to keep them warm, completely ignoring the years they spent treating her like a disposable servant. This dynamic is incredibly common in dysfunctional households. Toxic individuals often use familial obligation as a free pass to disrespect you, assuming you will never have the courage to walk away or hold them accountable. Maya's journey brilliantly illustrates that true family is defined by mutual respect, protection, and unconditional support, not just shared DNA. By refusing to save her abusers from their self-inflicted ruin, she broke a painful generational cycle of manipulation. She realized that letting people experience the harsh reality of their own terrible choices is not cruelty, it is absolute justice. Walking away allowed her to reclaim her grandmother's physical legacy and build a beautiful, chosen family that actually valued her true worth. We must actively unlearn the toxic guilt associated with prioritizing our own peace and financial security over the demands of abusive relatives. If you are currently suffocating under the weight of forced familial obligations, please share your story in the comments below and subscribe to join our community of healing and absolute empowerment.